What is up, everybody? So I've got a Grisly Sultai action for you today. I didn't really know what to call it or classify. It's kind of more of like a Sultai aggro type deck. Originally, what it was my Sultai Delver deck. And whenever they released Grim Flayer, I stuck Grim Flayer in there, and as I kept playing with them, I was like, well, I need to keep building the graveyard a little bit better. And so I ended up cutting Delver and kind of making it more of like a little Sultai aggro graveyard type deck. It's fun. It's definitely a starting point. This is how I'm approaching the deck. But yeah, let me just get into it. So this is basically just a graveyard Sultai deck. One of the ways that we're looking to fuel the graveyard is so we can pump Grimflayer. So if you're unfamiliar, Grimflayer, it has trample whenever it deals damage to a player. You may look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put any number of them into your graveyard, and the rest on top of your library. So we're looking to get Delirium active. So once Delirium is active, Grimflayer goes from a 2/2 to a 4/4 with trample. And it's actually not that hard to get Delirium going. So we're running stuff like Phyrexian Revoker. So if we happen to get Phyrexian Revoker into the grave, I'll show you how we get cards in the graveyard. But he's an artifact creature that really helps get Delirium going for Grimflayer. We're also running another really good graveyard creature in Tarmogoyf. Tarmogoyf is equal to the number, card types in the graveyard. So Tarmogoyf really goes in hand with Grimflayer as far as getting our graveyard going. Now, ways to get the graveyard going. This deck really revolves around Grisly Salvage. So this is from Return to Ravnica. Reveal the instant speed. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a creature or land from them into your hand. And it is a May ability. So let's say we need to get Delirium active for Grimflayer, and you say you're swinging in with a 2/2. So you can cast Grisly Salvage at instant speed, and you can grab a creature you need for later in the turn, or you can grab a land, or if you just need to put something into the graveyard to get Delirium going. So you can kind of use Grisly Salvage as a way kind of like a combat trick for Grimflayer. You can also do the same thing for Tarmogoyf. So let's say he's swinging in for 2/3, if you don't have an instant in the graveyard, so you at least just cast Grisly Salvage. It'll pump up to 3/4. So definitely, it's really good that Grisly Salvage is instant speed. You can use it as a combat trick or to fuel the graveyard for Grimflayer or Tarmogoyf. Now, as far as the other creatures we've got in the deck, I love playing with Dark Confidant. We have Dark Confidant, and we also have Death's Shadow in here. So we have a lot of shocks and fetches over here. So Death Shadow actually fits in really well as far as what we're doing. And it fits in with the Dark Confidant plan, too. This is basically just... This deck is my take on a Sultai for Modern. You don't really see Sultai that much. If you do, it's just kind of like a mid-rangey control type deck. So I kind of wanted to build a little Sultai aggro over here. So we're running Dark Confidant in here. And since we're putting stuff into the graveyard, I'm running 2 Snapcasters just to get into some, whatever we need coming out of the graveyard. As far as our removal goes, we've got 2 Dismembers and 3 Abrupt Decays. Once again, if you have Death Shadow in your opening hand, Dismember is really good as far as getting it down to where you can get Death Shadow out a little bit early, especially if you're pretty aggressive with your shocks and your fetches. But yeah, I think that's it for the deck. We're running Inquisition, Thoughtseize, running 4 Thought Scours too is another way to get the graveyard going. A really cool thing with Thought Scour is, let's say we swing in with Grimflayer. So you have the Grimflayer activation. You can look at the top 3 cards. Say you put 1 card on top of your library, draw that card. So you can cast Thought Scour targeting your opponent. He's going to mill those 2 cards, and then you can draw the card that you put on the top of the library from Grimflayer. So that's a pretty cool little interaction as far as Thought Scour goes. You can instantly draw the card that you popped off the Grimflayer trigger whenever it deals damage. But I think that's it for the deck. We're also running 1 Grapple from the Past. I may, after recording some matches with Grapple in the past, I may go 2 Grapples and 3 Grisly Salvages. Grapple's pretty good in the deck. I really much enjoyed playing with it. But yeah, that's the main. Let's go on to the sideboard. So nothing too crazy over here. We've got your standard Dispels when you're playing against Path to Exile, stuff like that. Your control decks. Got an extra Thoughtseize in here if we need to bring it in. Nature's Claim. We have Grafdigger's Cage if we're playing against Dredge. Dredge is pretty hard against this deck. It's pretty rough going. So hopefully you get into Grafdigger's Cage. Then we have the Baloth if we're getting against the Jund or the Liliana matchup. Golgari Charm. Golgari Charm is really good in here. It's if you're playing against any type of token-based deck, you'll see some of the matches where Golgari Charm really put them some work, and it's really good in here. Plus, we're mainly using it for the -1/-1, but the regenerate each creature you control is pretty good to have. Scavenging Ooze, say we're playing against Burn, we need to get a little extra. It kind of Scavenging Ooze takes away from the late game Death Shadow plan, but I like Scavenging Ooze coming out of the sideboard. And Trick Bind, Nahiri Planeswalker control, whether it's Mardu or Jeskai, is definitely floating around, and I always like running trick bind as a one of sometimes if I can support it in modern, just because if they go to ultimate into here, you can trick bind the ultimate and stop them dead in their tracks right there. And plus, you can hit a fetch land off this. There's a lot of stuff that trick bind can hit, and I feel like it's a really underplayed modern card. So if I always try and at least leave one room for it in my sideboard, one slot for it. Then we've got the negates, non-creature spells, and Hurkyl's Recall. So but yeah, that's the deck in a nutshell. And this is a work in progress. When I do modern decks for this is the first modern deck I'm getting out for my channel. I'm really open to suggestions. Like I like to play tier 2 decks, so this is kind of more of like, hey, this is what I've come up with as far as Sultai aggro. So if you have the cards and test it out, go for it. Let me know. If you think you have some suggestions I could add to the deck to make it better, definitely let me know. I'm always open to it. So I very much enjoy playing tier 2 decks. Now, as far as the budget version of this deck, let's say you don't have 4 copies of Tarmogoyf, you can do the I can't remember his name now, but when it has Delirium, it's a 3/4. So you could definitely run that in place of Tarmogoyf. And if you don't have Snapcaster or Dark Confidants, you can maybe bump up the Death Shadow or kind of substitute Delver in there. But I've run Delver in here, and basically Death Shadow is a lot better than Delver because you're going to be able to flip it late game off a Grisly Salvage and it'll have an immediate impact. Whereas Delver, like turn one's really nice, but it just I played a lot of matches with it, and it's kind of like I don't think Delver fits in here. It doesn't fit very well, especially if we're trying to go for graveyard. But yeah, I think that's gonna be it as far as the deck tech goes. I've got 5 to 6 matches up there, so check them out. If you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. Thanks, guys.